Good afternoon. My name is Sam Sherpa, and today we're going to be talking about the Amazon EC2 Instance, or the Amazon Elastic Compute Cloud. Let's begin. So the EC2 is essentially the Elastic Compute Cloud. And what it does is it is an infrastructure as a service, and it consists of different storages, distributing the load, scaling the actual services, and renting the actual machines, which is the EC2. Now, knowing EC2 and how it works is pretty important, which is why we're going over this. And for the EC2 instances, they have operating systems just like us with the computers, such as Linux, Windows, or Mac OS, and this is entirely dependent on whatever we want to purchase. Do we want a higher compute power? Do we want more RAM? Do we want a faster CPU, more powerful CPU? And it also depends on what storage we want, how much storage space we would like. There's a lot of different things that are included in this. And in order to protect them, we also have this thing called security groups. Now, the EC2 user data is essentially utilizing the automated tasks such as installing updates, installing software, things like that. And all of these things are running with the root user. So essentially, it's like a script for that is automatically running, so you don't really need to worry about. So, in the EC2 instance, there is the compute optimized, which means that there is it's specifically for compute work. Those are that require high performance. For instance, for web servers, computing, HPC, which is the high performance computing, dedicated game servers such as Fortnite, and scientific modeling, machine learning, such as Amazon Athena, which we'll get more into later, things like that. There's another instance type, which is the memory optimized. Now, the memory optimized is used for high performance, but it's for relational and non-relational databases, which we will talk about in the future as well. And essentially, it's going to perform real-time processing for big unstructured data. There's also another instance type, which is the storage optimized. And now this is for relational or NoSQL databases, cache for in-memory databases, distributed file systems, data warehousing such as Redshift, which we'll go into more depth, and things like that. This essentially would be for storage intensive tasks that require high read and write high read and write performance to access the large datasets. There are different examples of the EC2 instance types. If you actually go into the EC2 instance, you can see that there are things that you might see something like a T2.micro. There is the T2.micro. There is something else like the M5.8x large. And these are actually the one of the biggest to one of the smallest. Micro is one of the smallest instances you could get, and I believe it is in the free tier. And the M5 is one of the largest. They support a lot of different things, such as the T2 Micro supports one vCPU, one memory, EBS type of storage, and the performance is low to moderate. For the M5.8x large, it's completely different. There's 32 vCPUs, 128 gigs of memory, EBS elastic block storage. There is 10 gigabytes per second storage, network performance, and the bandwidth is 6,800 megabytes per second. There's something even larger than this, but this is just essentially like a general description of how big it can possibly get. And for all these instances, you need to add some sort of security. Introducing these security groups, which are fundamental network security in the AWS. They're essentially controlling traffic, which lets in and out different information. So let's say you have, let me get rid of all these. So let's say, for instance, we have a website, right? Let me actually make this thicker. Oh, whoops, die. Okay. Let's make it 4 pixels. So let's say there's a website that we have. Oh, this is okay. We need to make it a bit bigger if possible. Let's see. Oil brush. Oh, okay, that's not too bad. Let's utilize this. So let's say there is a web, right? We got a website that is putting traffic. We are getting information, and we are getting out the information from the cloud. So this is the cloud, and in the cloud we have an EC2 instance. So normally this is what would happen, where if let's say you have a website, you are sending information, the user sends the information from the website to the cloud, and the cloud will send data back to the website. However, there is this tiny portion here called the security groups. Oh my god, pardon my spelling, but the security groups, which is essentially there to make sure nothing is, that you don't want is going inside, or nothing that you want to go out is going outside. So it's pretty handy when it comes to that. So if we go a little bit more into the security groups, they have these things called the firewall, which if I am going to erase, oh, I need a larger eraser. How do I? Okay, these are very small erasers. Okay, let me just brushes. I apologize for the delay, but okay. So, essentially, what we have here, okay. There we go. Okay, so we are. Let's go back into it. It's the oil brush. So the security groups has this thing called a firewall, and the firewall is there to regulate the access ports, the IPv4 ranges. So you can have IPv4 or 6, the inbound traffic and the outbound traffic. Now the diagram for the security group is essentially what we talked about before. They have the website, and they have the security group that is going to control and make sure that things that they don't want will not go inside. So they will essentially manage things first before it ever reaches the EC2 instance. And some of the information that we would like to go over for these security groups is that they can be attached to multiple instances, which is really useful. They are going to live outside the EC2. Now remember, if the traffic is being blocked from the outside, then the EC2 will never have to have an issue. So they're not going to see anything. And we also got to talk about the inbound traffic, which is going to be blocked by default, and the outbound traffic, which means the information that's going outside of the cloud is going to be authorized by default. You can always change them, of course, to however you want, but it is what it is. It's like whatever you want to do is up to you. And finally, there's also the application. If the application is not accessible and there's like a timeout, then it's most likely a security group issue. Something good to know. So there are some ports that honestly you don't need to have a perfect memorization, but for instance, for the secure soft shell, the secure shell. I don't know why I keep saying soft. Like it's probably because of the S here. That is number 22. The FTP, which is the Secure File Transfer Protocol, is also 22. If we go to the HTTP, which is like the website that is unsecured, that is number 80. And for the HTTPS, a secured website, is number 443. Now, there is the secured shell that we could talk about, and it's essentially there are different things that you can download that are compatible for different OSs, such as the Mac, Linux, something lower than Windows 10 or greater than or equal to Windows 10, such as Windows 11. There are, secure soft shell. Secure shell does work for Mac, Linux, and something that's greater than or equal to Windows 10, but anything that's less than Windows 10, it doesn't work. So what do we use? A fantastic software is actually in the console. It's in the AWS management console, which is the EC2 Instance Connect. Now, the EC2 Instance Connect is super easy. You have the management console, and on the top right there, it's literally going to say Connect. It's super easy, and essentially, if you're in the EC2 Instance Connect, you literally have to connect through your browser, but there's no need to use your access keys or whatnot because you already signed in to the management console. So there's going to be a temporary key that is already going to be generated automatically. That's how it allows you to use the Instance Connect. But it is super useful and super easy because it works with every single OS. Now, going further into the EC2 is we're going to be talking about the purchasing options that are there. So the purchasing options, PURCH. The purchasing options are pretty simple. So the first one is the on-demand instances. So the on-demand instances is going to be, let's see if I can zoom out a little bit more. So there's going to be the on-demand, and the on-demand is essentially a short workload and predictable pricing, which you would have to pay by the second. Now there's that, and there's also the reserved, which I really do apologize for my handwriting, but you can either get 1 or 3 years for that, and you can also get the convertible reserved instances, which has flexible instances, which means that you can actually change them at any point. They have a 1 and a 3-year plan for this, which means that the more of a larger plan that you pick, the more you're going to have to save. And reserved instance is one of those where you would actually end up saving quite a lot of money on. So if you pay everything up front, then you'll save essentially, I believe, up to 90% of the total cost. Now there's also the savings plan, which I don't know why it continuously stops my mouse, but there is a savings plan. And there's also the spot instances. And the savings plans is also a 1 to 3 year commitment, and you're tracking a certain amount of usage, and it's for long workloads. There are spot instances that are short workloads, and they're quite cheap, and it also can lose instances, which is going to be less reliable, because if you have something that's supposed to be running the entire time and the spot instances is gone, then everything gets deleted, so it's not reliable. Dedicated hosts are the next option, and dedicated hosts are very reliable when you have an actual license or something that you would have to utilize the entire physical server for. And this means that entire server is specifically designed for you, and no one can actually utilize that. Only you can, which is going to cost more, but it's very, very useful for larger companies. If you are a smaller company, or if you would like to use this, there's also the dedicated instance. Now, the dedicated instance is quite simple, because it's going to only control one specific instance out of the entire server, but no one else can use that instance, only you can. So this is like a more simpler, like a smaller version of the dedicated hosts. And the capacity reservations, which means essentially you're going to be reserving a specific amount of capacity in a specific availability zones, which is going to be even larger than the dedicated hosts. Now, I delete. Oh, perfect. Hey. So if we were to delete this and restart, maybe crayon would work better. But I want you to imagine that a dedicated host is essentially, like a house, right? Imagine if you have a house, and the dedicated host would be the house, and inside the house you have a box. Now that is the instance, and there can be multiple boxes, plenty of boxes, but this specific box is yours. And for capacity reservations, you're going to have multiple houses, in the specific availability zone, and that is for any possible duration. Now let's clear this up again. Okay. Let's talk more in depth about the EC2 on-demand, and this is essentially pay for what you use. You can either get Linux or Windows, and you can also use all other operating systems. However, specifically for Linux and Windows, it's billed by the second, and for the other operating systems, it's billed per hour. It also has the highest cost out of all of the other storage types, and it has no long-term commitment, which means that it's essentially for a short-term and uninterrupted workload. However, you get the freedom of disabling it at any time or enabling it any time. It's going to be more expensive, but that's the cost. That's the I guess the offer that you have to deal with. And if we go to the crayon, okay, so the EC2 reserved instances for which is the next type of storage, you can get a 72% discount if you either utilize the 1 year or a 3 year. And remember, the more amount of years you commit, the more discount you get, and the more the more money you pay upfront, the more discount you get as well. So imagine if you combine both the 3 years plus the upfront, that is going to give you a 72% discount. But this is going to be like everything that you pay right off the bat, and it's going to be super cheap, but it's not necessarily recommended for what was it, the on-demand, which was uninterrupted workloads, but then like super short term with a higher compute power. The reserved instance is actually going to be a little bit less compute power. Think of it like a database, where you have more and more of storage and less of performance or compute power. And this is also going to lead into the convertible reserved instance, the CRI. So this convertible reserved instance is going to get a 66% discount, and it's essentially the same thing where you can have a 3-year contract or a all up front. So that's the discount you get if you get the all up front and the 3-year commitment. If we were to delete this, so going into the next plan or storage is the EC2 savings plan, and the EC2 savings plan is the EC2 savings plan is essentially the utilizing a certain amount of storage and a certain amount of usage for whatever amount of time you want, right? So you can get up to a 72% discount, super nice. Where's my mouse? Oh, there it is. So you can get a 72% discount, and you can also be committed to a certain amount of usage. For instance, if you only want to use it for 1 year, you can use it for that amount, and if you want to use only like a certain amount of storage, you can use that, and you can utilize these things, and it's billed at the on-demand price, but you can also get a pretty high discount even if it's on-demand pricing. Now there's another storage type called the EC2 spot instances, and the EC2 spot instances actually has a 90% discount, which is the most, I believe, out of anything else, and it is the most efficient instance in the AWS, and it is one of the ones that is quite popular. However, you can lose the data or whatever at the actual instance at any point if you're not able to pay for it, right? And that's going to be super risky for critical jobs or databases where they have information and whatnot. You would want to use something safer like a reserved instance. Dedicated hosts are the next factor, which is essentially a physical server that you own and no one else is able to own, and the instance is at full capacity for your use. You can either pay for on-demand or you can either pay reserved, and this allows you to have compliance requirements or licensing for different companies, but it is the most expensive that we have to realize, but it is it could be useful for different factors. Now, going on to the instances, the EC2 dedicated instances, remember, we're only owning the box of the actual house, and we're owning a specific part, and the issue with that is that although you have that instance with you only, you can actually other customers cannot utilize this. However, other users in the same company can actually utilize that dedicated instance. And the only issue is while the host, you can pick exactly which server and where to place which instances. If you have a dedicated host in a random server, then it could be here, it could be here, it could be here, it could be anywhere. Every single time you reinitialize the dedicated instance, it might change to a different spot, it might change to this spot, and it might rarely be in that same spot as well. It's going to change every single time, essentially. And there's also the EC2 capacity reservations, which essentially means that you're able to reserve on-demand instances in a specific availability zone for a specific duration. There's no commitment, so there's not going to be like a 1-year commitment or a 3-year commitment, which also means that there's not going to be any discounts. So you'll be charged at on-demand, but it's suitable for uninterrupted workloads that needs to be in a specific availability zone. So, the pricings for all of these different storages or the purchasing option is going to vary from different storage options, and we'll go over this really quickly. But essentially, for the on-demand, it's going to be, like we said, it's going to be a per hour basis, and it's going to be 10 cents per hour. Spot instances that are 90% off, I believe, is going to be approximately 0.038, something around that, which is extremely cheap every hour. Reserved instances and reserved, the first year and the third year reserved instances are going to be generally around, for the first year it's going to be around 0.58. But however, if you go into the 3-year plan, it's going to be 0.37, which is quite a lot cheaper. Actually, there should be a 0.058. EC2 savings plan is also going to be the same exact as the reserved instances, and the dedicated host is going to be on-demand pricing, so it's going to be pricing based on however much you utilize. And the dedicated host reservation could be up to 70% off, and that's also on-demand pricing, including the capacity reservation, which is also on-demand pricing. Now we have to go over the shared responsibility model for the AWS, for the EC2, and essentially what that is that the AWS, which I would like to represent. So the AWS is, and the user, let me write that here. The AWS is going to be focusing on the, I'll just say an I for the infrastructure, the P, which is the physical hosts, the isolation of the physical hosts, maintaining and making sure that everything is okay. And if the EC2 instances is actually faulty and not your fault, because it's going to be a hardware type of issue, then they'll be able to replace everything. And finally, they also have to deal with compliance validation if everything is going according to what the country or the region has. As for the user, they are going to be focusing on the security groups, the operating system, which might require updates or patches depending on what version it is, software and utilities that are installed on the EC2 instance, I'll just put that in S, and then the IAM roles and groups that are assigned to the EC2, and finally the data security inside of the cloud, which is going to be specifically for the instance. So going over the final summary on the EC2 instance, essentially the final summary is that the EC2 instance is going to be a compromised group of the AMI, the OS, the instance size, which is the CPU and RAM, the storage, the security groups, and finally the EC2 user data. The security groups are the next factor, which is essentially a security layer, which is a firewall that's going to be attached, not inside, but attached to the EC2 instance. There's going to be the EC2 user data, which is going to be a script that you can use using like JavaScript or whatever language, and it's going to initialize at the start of the instance. There is the secure shell that we can use for the terminal. We can also use the instance connect if the secure shell does not work. We can also use EC2 Instance role, which means that we're going to be linking the IAM roles to the proper instances. And finally, what we recently talked about was the purchasing options, such as the on-demand, spot, dedicated host, dedicated instance, reserved, and whatnot. And there we go. That's everything. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope you guys enjoyed. See you guys next time.